The morning mist clung to the mountainside like a gray blanket, obscuring the jagged rocks and sparse vegetation that dotted the hostile terrain. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her field medical pack and squinted through the haze, trying to make out the positions of the soldiers scattered across the ridgeline below. At 26, she had already spent 3 years as a combat medic, but this assignment felt different. The tension in the air was thicker than usual, and even the seasoned veteran seemed on edge. The forward operating base had been established just 2 days earlier, carved out of the unforgiving landscape with bulldozers and determination. Sarah's unit, the 82nd Medical Support Company, had been tasked with providing emergency medical care to the troops positioned along this strategic ridge that overlooked a crucial supply route. Intelligence reports suggested enemy forces were planning to disrupt convoys passing through the valley below, and the ridge position was vital for maintaining security. Sarah checked her watch. It was 06:30 hours, and the first patrol was scheduled to move out in 30 minutes. She had volunteered for the forward support position, knowing that being closer to the action meant she could provide faster care if things went wrong. Her commanding officer, Captain Reynolds, had initially hesitated to approve her request. The position was exposed and dangerous, but Sarah's track record spoke for itself. She had pulled wounded soldiers from burning vehicles, performed emergency surgery under fire, and never lost a patient when quick intervention was possible. The communication radio crackled to life in her earpiece. "Medic 1, this is command. Radio check, over." Sarah pressed the transmit button on her shoulder. "Command, this is Medic 1. I read you 5 by 5. Over." She was positioned about 200 meters behind the main defensive line, with a clear view of the entire ridge and quick access routes to any position that might need her. As the sun began to burn through the morning fog, Sarah could see the soldiers more clearly. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking equipment and adjusting positions. Sergeant Williams, a grizzled veteran with 15 years of service, caught her eye and gave a thumbs up from his position near the ridge's eastern edge. She had treated Williams for a minor shrapnel wound the previous month, and since then, he had looked out for her like a protective older brother. The terrain around Sarah's position was challenging. Large boulders provided natural cover, but the ground was uneven and treacherous. She had carefully mapped out several routes to different sections of the ridge, timing herself on practice runs during the previous evening. If someone got hit, every second would count, and she needed to know exactly how to reach them quickly regardless of where they were positioned. Her medical pack contained everything she might need for emergency treatment in the field. Pressure bandages, morphine, saline solutions, airway management tools, and a compact defibrillator were all secured in easy-access pouches. She also carried additional ammunition for the soldiers, water purification tablets, and emergency rations. The weight was substantial, but Sarah had trained extensively with full gear and could move quickly despite the load. At 0700 hours, the first patrol began moving down the ridge toward the valley floor. Sarah watched through her field glasses as the 6-man team navigated the steep rocky slope with careful precision. Their mission was to establish observation posts and gather intelligence on enemy movement patterns. It was routine work, but in this environment, routine could turn deadly in an instant. The radio remained relatively quiet for the first hour. Occasional position updates and equipment checks punctuated the morning silence. Sarah used the time to review her medical protocols and mentally rehearse emergency procedures. She had learned early in her career that preparation and constant mental practice could mean the difference between saving a life and losing one under pressure. Around 0830 hours, movement in the valley caught her attention. Through her field glasses, she could see what appeared to be a small group of figures moving along a distant ridgeline on the opposite side of the valley. She immediately reported the sighting to command, providing detailed coordinates and descriptions of what she observed. Intelligence would analyze the information and determine whether the movement represented a threat. The soldiers on her ridge had also spotted the distant figures. She could see them adjusting their positions and bringing their weapons to ready positions. The tension level immediately increased, and Sarah felt her own adrenaline beginning to flow. She double-checked her equipment and confirmed her planned routes to each defensive position. At 08:09:15 hours, the situation escalated. The patrol in the valley reported possible enemy contact and requested immediate support. Sarah listened to the radio traffic as command coordinated a response. Additional units were being deployed and close air support was being arranged. Her role was to remain in position and be ready to provide medical support if casualties occurred. The next 30 minutes passed slowly. Radio chatter increased as various units maneuvered into position. Sarah could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching from the south, and she knew that whatever was about to happen would likely happen soon. She performed one final equipment check and mentally reviewed the fastest routes to each section of the ridge. At 09:47 hours, the first shots were fired. The sound echoed across the valley, sharp and unmistakable. Sarah immediately went to high alert, scanning the ridge line for any signs of wounded soldiers. The firefight was taking place in the valley below, but she knew that the situation could change rapidly and expand to include the ridge positions. What happened next would change everything Sarah thought she knew about her role in this conflict. As she maintained her vigilant watch over the soldiers under her care, she had no idea that within the next few minutes, she would find herself at the center of a mystery that would capture the attention of a general and alter the course of the entire operation. The shot that would soon ring out from somewhere on the ridge would not come from any enemy weapon, and its consequences would reverberate far beyond this remote mountain battlefield. She was only providing support on the ridge, until the general asked, "Who fired that shot?" The firefight in the valley intensified over the next 20 minutes. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of rifle fire mixed with the deeper rumble of machine gun bursts. Through her field glasses, she watched muzzle flashes winking like deadly fireflies among the rocks below. The patrol that had descended earlier was now pinned down behind a cluster of boulders, returning fire against an enemy force that seemed to have materialized from nowhere. Command was coordinating the response with military precision. Additional squads were moving to flanking positions, and the approaching helicopters were now close enough that Sarah could identify them as Apache gunships. The distinctive sound of their rotors grew louder as they prepared to provide close air support to the embattled patrol. Sarah's position on the ridge gave her an excellent view of the entire tactical situation. She could see friendly forces maneuvering on multiple ridge lines, enemy positions marked by brief muzzle flashes, and the patrol trapped in the valley below. Her radio crackled with constant updates as squad leaders reported their positions, and command directed the overall response. At 10:15 hours, everything changed. A single shot rang out from somewhere on Sarah's ridge, distinctly different from the battle sounds echoing up from the valley. The report was sharp and close, unmistakably from a high-powered rifle fired from one of the defensive positions around her. What made it unusual was the timing and direction. The shot had not been fired toward the valley where the enemy was engaged, but rather toward the opposite ridgeline where friendly forces were positioning themselves. Sarah immediately scanned the ridge through her field glasses, trying to identify which position the shot had come from. She could see soldiers at their posts, but in the confusion of the ongoing battle, it was impossible to determine who had fired. What troubled her more was the target. Following the likely trajectory of the shot, it appeared to have been aimed at a position where she knew American forces were located. The radio exploded with urgent communications. "Command, this is Bravo 6. We have a man down. Repeat, we have a man down. Request immediate medical evacuation." The voice was tight with stress and barely controlled panic. Sarah's heart rate spiked as she realized the implications. Someone on her ridge had apparently shot a friendly soldier. Without waiting for orders, Sarah grabbed her medical pack and began moving toward the western edge of the ridge, where she could best access the wounded soldier's position. The route was treacherous, requiring her to navigate between large rocks and across unstable scree slopes. As she moved, she keyed her radio. "Command, this is Medic 1, moving to assist wounded friendly. Request route guidance and suppression of enemy fire." "Medic 1, be advised the wounded soldier is on the opposite ridgeline. You cannot reach him directly. Air medical is en route to his position." The response from command carried an unusual tension that Sarah had never heard before. Something more was happening here than just a battle casualty. Sarah slowed her movement and tried to process the situation. If the wounded soldier was on the opposite ridge and the shot had come from her ridge, then someone in her immediate area had committed what amounted to fratricide. Either it was an accident caused by confusion in the heat of battle, or something far more sinister was occurring. She found a covered position with good observation of both ridge lines and began methodically scanning the friendly positions on her ridge. Every soldier she could see appeared to be properly oriented toward the valley where the enemy was located. Their weapons were pointed in appropriate directions, and their behavior seemed normal for a combat situation. Yet one of them had fired the shot that wounded the American soldier across the valley. The battle in the valley below was reaching its climax. The Apache gunships had arrived and were systematically engaging enemy positions with devastating precision. The distinctive sound of their 30mm cannons echoed across the mountains as they eliminated threats that had pinned down the patrol. Within minutes, the enemy fire diminished significantly, and the trapped patrol began reporting their status and preparing to move to more secure positions. But even as the main battle wound down, tension on Sarah's ridge continued to build. She could hear urgent radio communications between command and various squad leaders as they tried to piece together what had happened. The wounded soldier on the opposite ridge was being evacuated by helicopter, but questions about the source of his wound were growing more serious by the minute. At 10:45 hours, Sarah received an unexpected radio call. Medic 1, this is command. General Morrison is en route to your position. You are to remain in place and prepare for immediate debriefing. The mention of a general sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Generals did not personally respond to routine battle incidents. Something significant was developing. Sarah used the time before the general's arrival to carefully observe every soldier position she could see. She made mental notes of each person's location, weapon orientation, and behavior. If there was going to be an investigation into the shooting, every detail might be important. She also reviewed her own observations from the moment the shot was fired, trying to recall any visual or audio clues that might help identify the source. 20 minutes later, the distinctive sound of a military helicopter approaching from the rear announced the general's arrival. Sarah watched as the aircraft landed at the forward operating base, and within minutes, she could see a small group of figures moving up the ridge toward her position. Even at a distance, she could identify the bearing and confidence that marked senior military leadership. General Morrison was a legendary figure in the Army, known for his tactical brilliance and unwavering commitment to his soldiers. He had commanded operations in multiple theaters and was respected by everyone from privates to colonels. His personal involvement in this incident meant that the friendly fire shooting was being treated as far more than an accident. As the general's party approached her position, Sarah stood and prepared to render appropriate military courtesies. She had never met a general before, and despite her confidence in combat situations, she felt nervous about the impending encounter. The fact that she was likely to be questioned about her observations added to her anxiety. General Morrison reached her position accompanied by 2 staff officers and a senior NCO. He was exactly as Sarah had expected, tall, lean, and carrying himself with the quiet authority that came from decades of leadership in challenging situations. His eyes were sharp and intelligent, and she could immediately sense that he was someone who missed very little of what happened around him. After brief introductions and military courtesies, the general got straight to the point. His voice was calm but carried an undertone of steel that made it clear this was serious business. The question he asked would echo in Sarah's memory for years to come, marking the moment when her role changed from medical support to key witness in an investigation that would shake the foundations of everything she thought she knew about the soldiers she served alongside. She was only providing support on the ridge until the general asked, "Who fired that shot?" General Morrison studied Sarah with the intense gaze of a man accustomed to reading people under pressure. His weathered face showed decades of experience in situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Behind him, his staff officers maintained respectful silence while scanning the ridge positions with professional interest. "Specialist Mitchell," the general began, his voice carrying across the mountain air with crisp authority. "I understand you had the best observation position when the incident occurred. Tell me exactly what you saw and heard." Sarah straightened, recognizing that this was no routine after-action interview. The general's presence and the formal tone indicated something far more serious was unfolding. Sarah recounted her observations methodically, describing the progression of the valley battle, the positioning of friendly forces, and the moment when the single shot rang out from somewhere on their ridge. She was careful to stick to facts and avoid speculation, but the general's questions pushed her to remember details she might have overlooked. "The trajectory of the shot," General Morrison pressed, "based on your position and what you observed, can you narrow down which sector it came from?" Sarah closed her eyes briefly, mentally reconstructing the moment. The sound had been sharp and close, definitely from a high-powered rifle. The timing had been wrong for engagement with valley targets, and the direction had been toward friendly positions. "Sir, based on the audio signature and my position, I believe the shot originated from somewhere in the eastern section of our ridgeline, she replied. The sound characteristic suggested it was fired from an elevated position, approximately 200 to 300 meters from my location. The general nodded and made notes on a tactical pad. What happened next surprised Sarah. Instead of dismissing her, General Morrison asked her to accompany his party as they visited each defensive position on the ridge. Specialist, I want you to observe the soldiers as we question them. You know these men, and you've been trained to read people under stress. I need your assessment of their responses. As they moved from position to position, Sarah found herself in the unusual role of both witness and investigator. At each stop, the general asked pointed questions about ammunition expenditure, target engagement, and weapon maintenance. His approach was methodical and professional, but Sarah could sense an underlying tension that suggested he suspected more than accidental discharge. The first 3 positions they visited yielded nothing unusual. The soldiers were professional in their responses, their equipment was properly maintained, and their accounts of the battle were consistent with what Sarah had observed. But at the 4th position, something felt different. Corporal James Hendricks was a 22-year-old soldier from Texas who had joined Sarah's unit 6 months earlier. He was competent and reliable, but Sarah had noticed that he sometimes seemed distant from the other soldiers. When General Morrison began questioning him, Hendricks appeared more nervous than the situation warranted. "Corporal, when did you last fire your weapon?" the general asked. Hendricks hesitated for just a moment before responding. "During the engagement with enemy forces in the valley, sir. I fired approximately 15 rounds at identified targets." The general examined Hendricks's rifle, checking the chamber and magazine. "Show me your ammunition count, soldier." As Hendricks produced his remaining ammunition, Sarah noticed something odd. His nervousness seemed to increase rather than decrease as the general continued the routine inspection. Most soldiers relaxed once they realized the questions were standard, but Hendricks appeared to be growing more uncomfortable. General Morrison apparently noticed the same thing. His questions became more specific. "Corporal, describe the targets you engaged and the results you observed." Hendricks provided a detailed account that seemed rehearsed rather than natural. Sarah had heard enough combat reports to recognize the difference between genuine recollection and prepared statements. The breakthrough came when the general asked about sight adjustments. "Corporal, what range is your weapon currently zeroed for?" Hendricks glanced at his rifle's scope settings and replied, 300 meters, sir." General Morrison examined the scope more closely, and his expression changed subtly. "Interesting. This scope is currently set for 600 meters. Can you explain the discrepancy?" The color drained from Hendricks's face. 600 meters was approximately the distance to the opposite ridgeline where the friendly soldier had been wounded. 300 meters was the appropriate setting for engaging targets in the valley below. The wrong setting suggested deliberate long-range targeting rather than engagement with the closer enemy forces. "Sir, I must have adjusted it during the battle," Hendricks stammered. "The confusion of combat, sir. I may have made an error." But his explanation lacked conviction, and Sarah could see that General Morrison was not buying it. The general's staff officers had also picked up on the inconsistencies and were taking detailed notes. General Morrison stepped closer to Hendricks, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Corporal, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want complete honesty. When did you last fire your weapon, at what target, and for what purpose?" The weight of command authority was fully behind the question, and Sarah could see Hendricks beginning to crack under the pressure. What followed was a confession that shocked everyone present. Hendricks broke down and admitted that he had deliberately fired at the soldier on the opposite ridge. His motive was personal revenge, stemming from an incident months earlier when the wounded soldier had reported Hendricks for a disciplinary violation. The report had cost Hendricks a promotion and earned him extra duty assignments. "I didn't mean to actually hit him," Hendricks sobbed. "I just wanted to scare him, maybe put a shot close enough to make him think he was under enemy fire. I never thought my aim would be that good at that distance." The confession sent shockwaves through the assembled group. Attempted murder of a fellow soldier was among the most serious crimes possible in military law. General Morrison's face was stone as he listened to the confession. When Hendricks finished, the general turned to his staff officers. "Place Corporal Hendricks under immediate arrest. Full investigation protocols are now in effect. I want this ridge secured and every piece of evidence preserved." As Hendricks was restrained and led away, General Morrison turned back to Sarah. His expression had softened slightly, but the gravity of the situation remained evident. "Specialist Mitchell, your observations were crucial in solving this case. Without your detailed account of the shot's trajectory and timing, we might never have identified the perpetrator." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the mystery was solved and that no enemy infiltrator was operating among them. Sadness that a fellow soldier had deliberately tried to harm another over a petty grievance. The incident would have far-reaching consequences for unit morale and trust, but General Morrison wasn't finished with her yet. As the immediate crisis was being managed, he pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation that would reveal additional complications she had never anticipated. The case of Corporal Hendricks was just the beginning of a larger investigation that would test everything Sarah believed about loyalty, duty, and the bonds between soldiers. She was only providing support on the ridge, until the general asked, "Who fired that shot?" General Morrison led Sarah to a secluded area behind a large boulder formation, away from the bustle of the investigation that was now unfolding across the ridge. His demeanor remained serious, but Sarah detected a subtle shift in his approach. The formal interrogation was over, but something else was beginning. "Specialist Mitchell," the general began, lowering his voice. "What I'm about to tell you is classified and cannot be discussed with anyone without my direct authorization. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, feeling a knot form in her stomach. The discovery of Hendricks' attempted fratricide had been shocking enough, but the general's tone suggested there were deeper layers to this situation. 3 weeks ago, military intelligence received reports of potential insider threats within forward units in this sector. General Morrison continued, "Someone has been passing information about patrol routes and defensive positions to enemy forces. The attack on today's patrol was too well coordinated to be coincidental. The enemy knew exactly where our people would be and when they would be there." Sarah's mind raced as she processed this information. The implications were staggering. Not only had they just discovered one soldier's attempt to harm another, but there might also be a traitor actively working with the enemy. The weight of responsibility she was feeling grew heavier with each revelation. "Sir, how does this relate to what happened with Corporal Hendricks?" she asked. General Morrison's expression darkened further. "We believe Hendricks' action today may have been intended to cover up evidence of the larger conspiracy. The soldier he shot, Sergeant Martinez, had been conducting his own informal investigation into suspicious activities within the unit. The pieces began falling into place for Sarah. Sergeant Martinez was known throughout the unit as someone who paid attention to details and wasn't afraid to ask difficult questions. If he had discovered evidence of collaboration with the enemy, it would explain why someone might want to silence him permanently. Hendricks' claim that the shooting was personal revenge might be a cover story for something much more sinister. "General, are you saying that Hendricks might be the traitor, or that he was acting on behalf of someone else?" Sarah asked. The question hung in the air between them like a live grenade. If there was a conspiracy involving multiple soldiers, then everyone on the ridge was potentially suspect, including people Sarah had served alongside for months. "That's what we need to determine," General Morrison replied. "Hendricks could be our traitor, or he could be a pawn being used by someone else. His breakdown and confession seem genuine, but it's possible he's been coached on how to respond if caught. We need to dig deeper into the relationships and communications within your unit." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was being asked to consider. The soldiers she had shared meals with, treated for injuries, and trusted with her life might include someone actively working to get Americans killed. The thought was almost too horrible to contemplate, but the evidence was becoming difficult to ignore. "What do you need from me, sir?" she asked. Though part of her dreaded the answer, General Morrison studied her carefully before responding. "I need you to help us identify potential suspects and gather intelligence on unit activities. Your position as a medic gives you unique access to information. Soldiers talk to medics differently than they talk to commanders." The general was right. As a combat medic, Sarah had indeed heard conversations and observed behaviors that others might miss. Soldiers often shared personal information while receiving medical treatment, and they tended to trust medics with sensitive details about their fears, relationships, and problems. She was being asked to use that trust as an intelligence-gathering tool. "Sir, with respect, what you're asking me to do feels like spying on my own unit," Sarah said carefully. "These people depend on me to save their lives. How can I maintain their trust while secretly investigating them?" It was a legitimate concern, and she hoped the general would understand her position. General Morrison nodded slowly. "I understand your conflict, Specialist. But consider this. If there is a traitor in your unit, they're already putting every one of those soldiers at risk. Today's attack could have killed multiple people, and it might not be the last. Your investigation could save lives, not just compromise trust." Sarah realized the general was right, but the ethical dilemma remained complex. She would be walking a tightrope between her duty to her patients and her responsibility to protect her unit from internal threats. The skills that made her an effective medic, observation, empathy, and the ability to read people under stress, were exactly what the general needed for his investigation. "How would this work practically?" Sarah asked. "I can't start interrogating people without raising suspicions." General Morrison had clearly thought through the operational details. "You continue your normal duties, but you pay special attention to patterns of behavior, communication habits, and any inconsistencies in what people tell you. We're particularly interested in anyone who seems to have unusually detailed knowledge of operations or who ask questions beyond their need to know," the general provided Sarah with specific guidelines for what to look for and how to report her observations. She would have a secure communication channel directly to intelligence officers, bypassing normal command structures that might include the very people they were investigating. The weight of responsibility felt enormous, but Sarah knew she had no choice but to accept the mission. Over the next hour, General Morrison briefed Sarah on additional security procedures and introduced her to Major Patricia Stone, the intelligence officer who would be her primary contact. Major Stone was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who had extensive experience in counterintelligence operations. She would provide ongoing guidance and support for Sarah's investigation efforts. As the briefing concluded, General Morrison made one final point that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "Specialist, be extremely careful about who you trust. If our suspicions are correct, the traitor has already demonstrated a willingness to kill fellow soldiers to protect their operation. Don't take any unnecessary risks and don't hesitate to abort if you feel threatened." Sarah watched as the general and his staff departed, leaving her alone with the knowledge that her world had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a combat medic providing support on a remote ridge. She had become an undercover investigator, tasked with identifying a potential traitor who might be willing to kill to protect their secret. As she prepared to return to her normal duties, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every glance from a fellow soldier now carried potential significance. Every casual conversation might contain hidden meaning. The simple clarity of her medical mission had been replaced by a complex web of suspicion and danger that would test every skill she possessed. The real investigation was just beginning, and Sarah had no idea how deep the conspiracy might go or how far someone would go to keep their secrets hidden. The safety of every soldier on the ridge might depend on her ability to unmask a traitor who had already proven they were willing to kill. She was only providing support on the ridge until the general asked, "Who fired that shot?" Over the following 3 days, Sarah found herself living a double life that tested every aspect of her character and training. During daylight hours, she continued her duties as a combat medic, treating minor injuries, conducting health checks, and maintaining her equipment. But underneath the routine medical work, she was constantly observing, listening, and analyzing every interaction for potential clues about the suspected traitor. The investigation had yielded some disturbing preliminary findings. Intelligence analysis of recent enemy attacks showed patterns that strongly suggested inside information was being provided to hostile forces. Patrol routes that had been changed at the last minute were still being targeted with suspicious accuracy. Supply convoys were being ambushed at locations where detailed knowledge of timing and cargo would be essential for planning effective attacks. Sarah's secure communication device, disguised as a standard medical monitoring unit, allowed her to report observations directly to Major Stone without arousing suspicion. Each evening, she transmitted coded reports detailing conversations she had overheard, behavioral anomalies she had noticed, and any unusual questions or comments from unit members. The first breakthrough came on the second day when Sarah was treating Private Rodriguez for a minor foot infection. During the routine medical consultation, Rodriguez mentioned that Sergeant Williams had been asking unusual questions about medical evacuation procedures and helicopter landing zones. The questions themselves weren't necessarily suspicious, but the timing and specificity struck Sarah as odd. Sergeant Williams was the same soldier who had given her a thumbs up on the morning of the firefight, the grizzled veteran she had previously treated for shrapnel wounds. The idea that he might be involved in treasonous activities seemed almost impossible to believe. But Sarah had learned to set aside personal feelings and focus on facts. She began paying closer attention to Williams's activities and conversations. What she discovered was troubling. Williams had an uncanny ability to anticipate changes in operational plans before they were officially announced. He also seemed to have detailed knowledge of activities in other sectors that weren't normally shared with personnel at his level. Most concerning was his habit of taking private walks along the ridge perimeter during off-duty hours, always carrying his personal radio. Sarah shared these observations with Major Stone, who instructed her to maintain surveillance while being extremely careful not to alert Williams to her suspicions. The intelligence officer also revealed that Williams had recently received several unexplained monetary deposits into his personal bank account, discovered during routine financial screening that had been implemented after the insider threat. Warnings: the psychological pressure of conducting undercover surveillance while maintaining normal relationships was taking its toll on Sarah. She found herself second-guessing every conversation and analyzing every gesture for hidden meaning. The trust that had previously existed between her and her fellow soldiers was being eroded by suspicion and the constant need to evaluate potential threats. On the third day, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. While conducting routine maintenance on her medical equipment, she noticed Williams approaching her position during what should have been his sleep period. He moved carefully and quietly, clearly trying to avoid detection by other soldiers. Sarah pretended to be absorbed in her work while covertly observing his activities. Williams positioned himself behind a large rock formation approximately 50 meters from Sarah's location and began operating what appeared to be a sophisticated radio communication device. The equipment was definitely not standard military issue, and his furtive behavior suggested he was engaging in unauthorized communications. Sarah activated the recording function on her concealed surveillance device and documented everything she could observe. The conversation was too distant for Sarah to hear specific words, but she could tell that Williams was both transmitting and receiving information. The session lasted approximately 10 minutes, after which Williams carefully concealed the radio equipment and began moving back toward the main base area. Sarah waited several minutes before investigating the location where Williams had been operating. A careful search of the area revealed disturbing evidence. Williams had been using a concealed cache to store the unauthorized radio equipment along with detailed maps of friendly force positions, patrol schedules, and operational plans that were classified well above his security clearance level. The discovery provided concrete proof that a serious security breach was occurring. Sarah immediately transmitted an emergency report to Major Stone, providing GPS coordinates for the cache location and detailed descriptions of the evidence she had discovered. The response was swift and decisive. Within 2 hours, a specialized security team arrived at the ridge to coordinate Williams' arrest and conduct a comprehensive investigation of the compromised information. The arrest was carefully planned to minimize disruption to ongoing operations while ensuring that Williams had no opportunity to destroy evidence or alert potential co-conspirators. Sarah watched from a distance as security personnel surrounded Williams during what appeared to be a routine equipment inspection. His shocked expression when confronted with evidence of his treasonous activities confirmed that the investigation had identified the correct suspect. Williams's subsequent interrogation revealed the full scope of his betrayal. For the past 6 months, he had been providing detailed intelligence to enemy forces in exchange for substantial monetary payments. His motivation was primarily financial, driven by gambling debts and family medical expenses that his military salary couldn't cover. The enemy had systematically exploited his vulnerabilities and gradually drawn him deeper into their intelligence network. The information Williams had provided had directly contributed to at least 3 successful enemy attacks, resulting in multiple casualties among American forces. His betrayal had put hundreds of soldiers at risk and had compromised numerous ongoing operations throughout the sector. The damage assessment would take weeks to complete, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions as the investigation concluded. Relief that the traitor had been identified and apprehended was tempered by sadness that someone she had trusted and worked alongside had betrayed everything they were supposed to stand for. The revelation also raised uncomfortable questions about how well anyone really knew their fellow soldiers and what pressures might drive someone to commit such ultimate betrayal. General Morrison returned to personally debrief Sarah and commend her role in uncovering the conspiracy. His assessment was that her medical background and training and observation had been crucial to the investigation's success. Without her detailed reporting and careful surveillance, Williams might have continued his treasonous activities indefinitely, putting countless additional lives at risk. But even as one crisis was resolved, Sarah sensed that her experiences over the past few days had fundamentally changed her perspective on military service and the bonds between soldiers. The simple clarity of her medical mission had been complicated by the knowledge that threats could come from within as well as from external enemies. The final chapter of her story would explore how she integrated these difficult lessons into her continuing service and personal growth. She was only providing support on the ridge until the general asked who fired that shot. 3 months after the Williams investigation concluded, Sarah found herself reflecting on how profoundly the experience had changed her understanding of military service and human nature. The ridge that had once seemed like a straightforward deployment location now held complex memories of betrayal, investigation, and the discovery that threats could emerge from the most unexpected sources. The immediate aftermath of Williams's arrest had been chaotic. The entire unit underwent extensive security reviews and psychological evaluations to ensure no additional compromised personnel remained undetected. Sarah had testified at multiple hearings and debriefings, providing detailed accounts of her observations and surveillance activities. The process was exhausting, but necessary to ensure that all aspects of the security breach were thoroughly understood and addressed. Williams himself had been convicted of treason and espionage charges, receiving a lengthy prison sentence that would effectively end his life as a free man. During his trial, additional details emerged about the sophisticated recruitment and handling techniques used by enemy intelligence services. Williams had been gradually compromised over many months through a combination of financial pressure, blackmail, and psychological manipulation that demonstrated the enemy's deep understanding of human vulnerabilities. The case had far-reaching implications beyond Sarah's unit. Military intelligence services implemented new security protocols and enhanced screening procedures designed to identify potential insider threats before they could cause damage. Sarah's role in the investigation had been recognized with commendations and recommendations that would significantly impact her future career opportunities. However, the personal cost of her involvement had been substantial. The trust that had previously existed naturally between Sarah and her fellow soldiers required careful rebuilding. Some unit members initially viewed her with suspicion, wondering whether she was continuing to conduct surveillance on behalf of military intelligence. Others struggled with the knowledge that someone they had trusted completely had been systematically betraying them for months. Sarah worked deliberately to restore normal relationships within the unit while maintaining the heightened awareness that her investigation experience had developed. She learned to balance healthy skepticism with the trust necessary for effective teamwork. The process was gradual and sometimes difficult, but it ultimately resulted in stronger bonds based on demonstrated loyalty rather than assumed compatibility. The medical aspects of her duties took on new dimensions as well. Sarah found that her enhanced understanding of human psychology and behavior patterns made her more effective at identifying soldiers who might be struggling with stress, financial problems, or other vulnerabilities that could be exploited by hostile forces. She developed informal counseling skills that complemented her medical training and allowed her to provide more comprehensive support to her patients. 6 months after the Williams investigation, Sarah received an unexpected visit from General Morrison. He had returned to the Ridge to conduct a comprehensive assessment of unit morale and operational effectiveness following the security crisis. During their private meeting, He offered Sarah an opportunity that would reshape her entire military career. Specialist Mitchell, the general began, your performance during the Williams investigation demonstrated exceptional aptitude for intelligence work. Military Intelligence Command is developing a new program that combines medical training with counterintelligence skills. They've specifically requested you for the pilot program. The offer was both exciting and daunting. Acceptance would mean additional training at advanced military schools, assignment to specialized units, and career opportunities that extended far beyond traditional medical roles. But it would also mean leaving behind the straightforward mission of battlefield medicine that had originally drawn her to military service. Sarah asked for time to consider the offer carefully. The decision would affect not only her own future, but also her relationships with the soldiers who depended on her medical expertise. After extensive consideration and consultation with trusted mentors, she decided to accept the new assignment while maintaining her medical qualifications and responsibilities. The specialized training program proved to be among the most challenging experiences of Sarah's military career. She learned advanced surveillance techniques, psychological assessment methods, and counterintelligence procedures while continuing to develop her medical skills. The combination created unique capabilities that made her valuable for assignments where medical access provided cover for intelligence gathering activities. Her first assignment under the new program took her to a forward operating base where suspected enemy infiltration was occurring among local support personnel. Using her medical duties as cover, Sarah was able to identify and neutralize a sophisticated intelligence operation that had been compromising base security for months. The success of this mission established her reputation as an effective intelligence operative with unusual capabilities. Over the following years, Sarah continued to develop her dual expertise in medicine and intelligence work. She served in multiple theaters of operation, always maintaining her primary identity as a combat medic while conducting sensitive investigations when required. The skills she had developed during the Williams case proved invaluable in numerous subsequent assignments. The experience on the Ridge had taught Sarah that military service involved far more complexity than she had initially understood. The simple goal of saving lives remained central to her mission, but she had learned that protecting soldiers sometimes required identifying threats that came from within their own ranks. The balance between trust and vigilance became a defining characteristic of her approach to both medical practice and intelligence work. As Sarah reflected on her journey from the confused morning when an unexpected shot rang out from the Ridge, she realized that the incident had revealed her true calling. She had discovered capabilities she never knew she possessed, and had found ways to serve that went far beyond her original expectations. The question, who fired that shot, had changed her life in ways she could never have anticipated. Years later, Sarah would look back on that morning as the moment when her real military career began. The Ridge that had seemed like just another deployment location had become the place where she discovered her unique ability to protect soldiers not just from enemy fire, but from the more subtle threats that could emerge from betrayal and deception within their own ranks. The investigation that started with General Morrison's simple question had evolved into a career dedicated to ensuring that the bonds between soldiers remained strong and that those who would betray their comrades were identified before they could cause irreparable harm. Sarah had found her purpose in the complex intersection of medicine, intelligence, and the eternal challenge of distinguishing between those who could be trusted and those who could not.